Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. Presidential candidates Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump met with Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu on Sunday. They discussed peace in the Middle East and Israel's security and the stability of the Iran deal. As you know, here at the Real News, we have been discussing the MOU on military assistance to Israel, worth $38 billion over the next 10 years. That's from 2019 to 2028. Well, in this edition of the Larry Wilkerson report, we're going to continue that discussion. Larry is going to respond to some of what we had covered thus far. Larry is, as you know, a retired United States Army soldier and former Chief of Staff to the United States Secretary of State, Colin Powell. He's also an adjunct professor at the College of William and Mary, where he teaches a course on U.S. national security. Thanks for furthering this discussion with us today, Larry.
My pleasure, Sharmini.
So, Larry, you and political economist Shir Heber have been having a back and forth over the nature of the recent U.S. aid deal with Israel. In an interview he said that when one considers the decline in purchasing power over the deal's 10-year period, the aid package is not really increasing. He also challenged your claim that Israel has become a strategic liability to the U.S. Let's have your response to that.
I think I agree with Shir on most of his points, and particularly on the reduction in purchasing power. I'm not exactly sure, though, having dealt with this before from the State Department's perspective on an annual appropriation basis, I'm not sure whether that was part of a package or part of a 5-year, 3-year, 10-year package or what, or if this is a new way of doing the aid. I think it's the latter. No one's responded to me yet, so this is so esoteric, apparently. Even some of the experts I've queried don't know. But if it is a lock-in, and if the Congress has gone along with that lock-in, that is to say they're not going to, perturb it over the decade, I'd find that difficult to believe. But if that's the case, if the leadership at least is okay with it, then what we have here is, as Shir has pointed out and made me think about even more profoundly than I was before, a reduction, and a reduction over time, and a reduction not only that, but more or less agreed upon by the legislative branch. Usually the place where presidents have a hard time when dealing with Israel in any kind of cutback at all. Whether this is a recognition of physical realities, I hope it is, or whether it's a recognition of the need to do this vis-a-vis Israel, I don't know, or whether the president just got it done. I simply don't know, but I agree with that point by Shir. I still maintain that Israel is a strategic liability, a huge strategic liability, particularly when you understand what's happening in Syria right now from the point of view of all the proxies involved and the great powers involved, like Russia and the United States, and I'd almost put Turkey in that category now. And you begin to understand how, as Ron Prosser, former Israeli ambassador to the UN, wrote about in the Jerusalem Post recently, or was quoted in the Jerusalem Post as saying, this is a dangerous situation for Israel, with Russia and the United States contending and possibly even coming to blows with one another. I would contend that the whole Syria situation is dangerous for the United States. And the situation that Israel provides to the United States vis-a-vis this struggle is as dangerous as the struggle itself. So, I mean, the real hard power in the region is not in Israel. It is never going to be in Israel. Even under duress, it's not going to be in Israel. So if you say, okay, let's get rid of Qatar, let's get rid of Saudi Arabia, let's get rid of all the other hard power assets we have in Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet, for example, then you've got to take a whole new strategic calculus and map out an entire new strategy for the United States vis-a-vis this region of the world. Even then, I don't think Israel is going to be a major part of that strategy.
And one other thing that I think both of you might agree on this point is that the aid deal in the final analysis is about the benefits to the U.S. arms industry, particularly since there is a part of it now that bars Israel from spending it on their own military industrial complex.
And thank you, Sharmini, for reminding me of the very self-centered nature of the United States Congress. You're absolutely right. That does mark a change. The money now, as I understand it, is going to be spent with U.S. defense contractors, Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, and others. And therefore, that brings another $30 billion plus over the next decade into their coffers. Not chump change by any standard. The other aspect of this, of course, is the fact that the way this has been interpreted in Israel, and Shear, I think, alluded to this, is that Netanyahu lost. That is to say, he actually diminished U.S. support in this very visible way. As I've said before, I think U.S. support is, and President Obama, military to military, intel to intel, and so forth, has tightened that support and made it even more substantive than it was in the past. But this really upfront public issue of money means something to the average Israeli citizen. And I think they know that this is a diminution, as Shear pointed out, and that Netanyahu is responsible for it. And they attribute some of that to his rancorous relations with President Obama and by extension with the United States. So I think this may cost Netanyahu the election in March.
All right, let's talk about our own election right here in the U.S. We're all gearing up for the big debate tonight, and Prime Minister Netanyahu did meet with both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump yesterday in New York. I suppose he's there for the UN General Assembly. But the issues discussed were, of course, the Iran deal, and then, of course, Middle East security and Israel security itself. So your response to the meetings and what they discussed?
I really have a problem. I have a problem with any presidential candidate or any president who is very forthright and straightforward about things like, as Trump was, Jerusalem, and Jerusalem being the official capital of Israel and designated and publicly announced as such. This just means you're joining the settler movement in Israel. It means you're joining the extreme right wing in Israel. It means you're joining the greater Israel.
Let me clarify here, Larry, you're responding to Donald Trump saying that Jerusalem should become the united capital of Israel. Okay.
Yes. I have a real problem with any candidate, prospective candidate, and legislator or otherwise, and certainly with the president, who would say this about Jerusalem in the face of U.S. policy for the last 3+ decades, which has been two states living side by side in peace, two economically and politically viable states. This flies in the face of that. It flies in the face of history, too, and it flies in the face of history in ways that the Israeli myth, and let me emphasize that word, myth, has publicized and made believable in the United States. Just as we have a myth about ethnic cleansing of the Native Americans and so forth, and we have a Hollywood and New York media-supported myth related to that, the Israelis have a myth about the Palestinians. And this myth is an important thing for the Israelis. I give them that. It's an important thing for Americans, too. Some of it's true, some of it's not true. But making this myth into a reality with a lot of the myth being still mythical is dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. There are two sides to this story, to this history, the Palestinian/Arab side and the Israeli/Jewish side. And it does no one any service, really, in time to mythologize either side. And so we need to go back to some fundamentals here. Israel being a state inside the 1967 borders, and Palestine increasingly being a state that's supported by Israel and the rest of the international community, including the Arabs, and including, as I said, Israel, and the non-Jewish citizens living inside Israel being treated as first-class citizens and not third and fourth-class citizens. If we're not aimed at something like that as a resolution over the next decade and a half, I fear for Israel's existence in the next 20 years.
Larry, one very important thing that came up was, of course, the Iran nuclear deal that Donald Trump proposes to undo if he becomes president. Your thoughts on that? And of course, Hillary Clinton had also indicated that the Iran deal will stay intact. So I just want to get your response to that before you go.
Anyone who would disassemble the Iran deal at this point borders on being an idiot, frankly. The Iran deal has taken a program that was very, very short distance away from a breakout capability that could have produced a bomb or bombs to a situation where, at least for the next 15 years, and I would argue with good IAEA procedures, the next 25 plus years, a year or better warning with somewhere between 95 and 99% reliability of any kind of breakout. So we have, and there's a lot more to it than that, of course, Charmaine, as you know, but we have achieved through diplomacy what we never would have achieved through warfare. We'd be terminally involved in a war with Iran. We'd still be in it. And we need to protect that. We need to preserve that. And there are legislators and others, and there are people on the Tehran side, the IRGC, for example, who would love to derail this deal. The IRGC movements, naval movements in the Persian Gulf on a daily basis demonstrate that in a very graphic form. We need to preserve this agreement. I think probably Secretary Clinton, hopefully someday maybe even President Clinton understands that. I'm not at all sure that a President Trump would, but I will tell you this: when he gets into the office and he reads the deal that he's so proud of himself for being able to read that deal, he's going to find out it's a much better deal than he thinks it is. It's a much better deal than war would be, and he's going to correspond with the deal too. It's going to be the Congress that's going to give him or Hillary tremendous problems because they want to, like they did with the North Korean deal, the agreed framework, they want to derail it.
All right, Larry, we'll be following this, and we'll also be looking out to make sure if this is discussed in the debate tonight, we'll be taking that up tomorrow as well.
Charmaine, I sure hope it's taken up tonight. I mean, that's one of the 5 or 6 issues that I'd put at the very top of the agenda, especially if we're talking security and foreign policy.
All right, then we expect you back tomorrow. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.